Okay, so we're live.
Great. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the breakout session. My name is Jennifer Schneider, and I am the YALI Partnership Specialist for USAID. Our session today, business communication and pitching, is one that most of us think about frequently in our jobs. It's the first and most important step for getting one's message across, whether you're pitching to investors and funders, whether you're trying to raise community awareness or influence policy. So in today's session, we're going to dive into the power of effective pitching and communication skills by looking at the critical components of a successful pitch and hearing from our panelists on their insights, their lessons learned throughout their careers. To get started, I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions and answers. So our three illustrious panelists today are Linda Roth, who is the Vice President of External Relations at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Jasmine Sneed, who is the founder and Chief Financial Officer of Aurora Tights, Raka Ratsimba, who is a 2019 Mandela Washington Fellow and also the Communications Officer for CARE International Madagascar. If you're interested in learning more about our panelists, I encourage you to click on the speakers tab underneath your video and you'll find bios on each of us. So to get started, Linda, I'll ask you the first question. The Wilson Center is in the think tank business, which is a very crowded field. What are the key elements of successful pitching and strategy? And as the Vice President for External Relations, how do you ensure that the Wilson Center stands out from its competitors?
Thanks, Jennifer. That's a great way to start because it's not only the think tank business that's crowded, it's for anyone or any organization at trying to get information out there. And that happens to be all of us. It's whether you're trying to get out a new academic report to influence policy like I do, introduce a new product like Jasmine might be doing, or Sidraka, or just even announcing a happy occasion on your life in Facebook, right? The challenge today is cutting through all the other pieces of information to make sure the people you want to reach with your news get it. And the term information explosion, right? The rapid increase in the amount of published information or data and information overload where you can't even manage all that information was first used about 60 years ago by an American social scientist. And since then, it's only gotten more crowded, right? A series of blasts, the internet, digital technology, social media, we're all in this information overload. And professions like journalism and academia, who were traditionally responsible for disseminating information, are suppressed. They're not as trusted as they once were, and people are getting their information from all kinds of places. So that's just like laying out the landscape for how difficult it is for all of us now to reach our audiences. So I have a few takeaways for successful pitching and building your strategy. As you said, I work at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and we're a think tank that's dedicated to connecting the worlds of academia and public policy. And we are nonpartisan, and we do independent research. And a lot of others throw around that word, nonpartisan and independent, in the world today, right? In such a partisan world. But we really have to be that way, because we are partially funded by the US Congress. And that means we have to make sure both main political parties here in the United States, Republicans and Democrats, support our work. And that means sticking to objectivity. And if not, we risk our appropriation and our reputation. So takeaway number one for breaking through, I think, in this really crowded field is what makes you unique, right? How are you different from your competitors? And you should be building all of your communication and pitching strategies around those aspects of your work. And I know my fellow panelists would agree with that because Jasmine has broken new ground in her market, being a one and only. And Saraka also is a self-described serial entrepreneur. And so I can't wait to hear how he's unique and he breaks out in his fields. The second takeaway I have is that in today's information landscape, content is king. And I actually just learned where that phrase came from, which was actually coined reportedly. I didn't confirm this with the man himself, but Bill Gates wrote a piece in 1996 on the Microsoft website where he said, content is where I expect much of the real money will be made on the internet, just as it was in broadcasting. And he was obviously right about that. And he called the piece Content is King. But if I were writing this same piece 25 years later, I would probably change it a little bit and say storytelling is king, right? There's so much content now, right? And how do you really connect with people? And you connect with people by storytelling, by telling the stories of people, how our work, our products, anything we're trying to do affects them. And that's what brings people together. And all my years as a journalist, which is what I did before I worked at the Wilson Center, I worked at CNN for 2 decades. And I traveled all over the world and doing stories of people. And I really felt like I was contributing to bringing people together, showing people a world they would not see themselves, educating them in a culture or a place that they would maybe never get to go to, right? So the next thing to do is to find the stories around your business, your product, your organization. In my case, I do it around my experts in their research. And, we tell the stories in many different ways, right? You can't just issue a written report now, right? Maybe we'll do a video with the authors, a series of tweets, a web article, a companion photo slideshow, right? For media audience, we might send a few key analysis quotes for reporters to use. And for the storytelling aspect, we'll look for the impact of our research on actual people in real communities. And the next step will be making it easy to consume, right? As a journalist, what do? They distill complex issues down so a general audience can understand them. And that's what also we need to do with our messages, right? And also as a journalist, we would try to tell people what they wanted to know, but also what they needed to know, right? And that's really difficult sometimes. So pitches and communications in our world should take a cue from that. Don't assume your audience is knowledgeable about your issue or your product. Don't use industry jargon, keep it simple. Especially journalists, if you're pitching them, they want short, timely, newsy pitches. And they definitely don't want them when they're busy doing another big breaking story, right? So be aware of your surroundings when you're pitching. And speaking of your audience, it's really important to know who they are, right? Make sure you know who you're trying to reach, because each segment of your audience is going to need a different piece of storytelling content message, right? To motivate them to share your ideas, to share your product, to share your research. And finally, where is your audience, right? You have to get yourself there. At the Wilson Center, our audience is the US Congress, government officials, and policymakers. So we're not going to waste a lot of time pitching places that they don't appear, right? We're not going to go on TikTok or Snapchat probably, because most of our target audience isn't there. And that's been like a big learning lesson for me from coming from journalism into communications, right? The most important thing is to know your audience, because if you don't know who you're trying to reach, you're going to go to the wrong places, you're going to have the wrong content, you're going to tell the wrong stories. And then I just wanted to circle back to the information overload idea. And a few years ago, US Naval War College professor Tom Nichols wrote a book called The Death of Expertise. And he blamed in part the internet and the explosion of media options for an anti-expertise, anti-intellectual sentiment he said was rising in the United States. And he said, quote, "These are dangerous times. Never have so many people had access to so much knowledge, yet been so resistant to learning anything." And I think that's still true today, even though we wrote that a couple of years ago. And so I just throw that out there as food for thought when we're doing our pitching, when we're creating our communication strategy, right? Make sure you have a well thought out plan to begin with. What are your goals? Who is your key audience? Where do you find them? Distill your messages and tell great stories. And that's how you'll get your word out there.
I love that. And I love what you also said about storytelling. I think that's something that we've thought about frequently with YALI. And certainly with YALI, there is no shortage of stories to tell. YALI alumni create the most amazing stories. But it is, we've learned from that experience how powerful those stories can be in communicating what we want to communicate, about how successful YALI is and about its impact we have. So thank you for sharing those. Jasmine, I'll ask you a little bit from your perspective as a business person and an entrepreneur. Why does pitching and communication matter? And what do you think the most critical components of a pitching plan are?
Absolutely. Great questions, Jennifer. And way to get us all started. Although we're representing different industries, a lot of what you're saying is going to align with what I'm saying as well. And so why does pitching and communications matter? Well, it's essential. It's all about storytelling, what we were just speaking about. People are drawn to stories and it helps make lasting memories. Even within that same vein, oral storytelling from the historical lens was a vehicle to pass deep-rooted information from generation to generation, particularly within African and African-American communities, And very similarly, pitching and communication is opportunity to tell your story, make it engaging, and move your audience to action. And that is a key piece, absolutely, within the entrepreneurial space. And what are the key components for that? Well, one, pitching is highly responsive to the audience. As Linda said, know your audience. And so it's important to take into account who you're talking to, what are their interests, and how long do you have to pitch them? All entrepreneurs have a 30-second pitch, a 1-minute pitch, a 5-minute pitch, 30-minute pitch if you'll let us. So, you got to be able to adapt to your audience and be fluid, have a key foundation, but be responsive to whoever your audience is. But outside of that, I think that is very key. We're all representing different backgrounds, but whether you're pitching yourself, your business, a product, or a service, there are some key things that I think are important for all pitches. And the first is to provoke interest. You have to bring people on board to see why what you're saying is important. Next, you want to transition to providing brief description to kind of build a foundation. Emphasis on brief, you want to be something that's still memorable that can kind of stay at the forefront of their minds. And you have to share your vision and bring them along with you. That's a huge piece. You want that buy-in. You want them to feel like they can take part of it. You want to inspire. And then finally, offer a call to action. I think that is a huge piece. Yes. And it needs to be there to kind of finish off a true pitch. And from my pitching experience, a little bit about Aurora Tights, we create inclusive performance apparel from the fairest to the deepest shades and for all sizes. Started this company because I'm a lifetime ice skater since the age of 5, and I never had performance apparel in my skin tone. I would always have to dye it myself in my bathtub, and that's as messy and time consuming and as expensive as you possibly can think. And so we decided to create a product to kind of fit that market. And with a product like that we have that's so niche, that most people that we're pitching have no idea what we're talking about. It's very important for us to tell a story, to bring them along with our journey. And so that's one thing I would say that's critical to all pitches is having some form of story, whether that's you, whether that's your customer, whether that's even a hypothetical person, but just some way to kind of clearly show what the problem is and bring them along to your solution that you're providing. And the second piece, I kind of referenced it a little bit earlier, but it's very, very important to have a call to action. You had their attention. You told them a great story, but let's finish it. Let's have that convert. And so sometimes that call to action might be funding. That's definitely one of the most common ways, but that's not the only thing you can ask for. You can ask for mentorship. You can ask for just for networking purposes, whatever it may be, but come to something in mind. And also I would have a limited amount of ask because you don't want to overload anyone. So 1, possibly 2 at the most, because you really just want this to be very clear and memorable. That's really what's key. And just to finish off, what are tips of success that I have learned and I want to share is just that it's important to pitch as much as possible, as often as possible. So when I started off pitching, I hated it. I wanted to be in the background. I really wanted just to work from the sidelines. But what I quickly found out is that entrepreneurs have to be our own salespeople. We have to be able to quickly share our vision in order to capture customers, stakeholders, whoever it may be. And so what I would say with starting to pitch as often as possible is start with a nice intimate group, someone who knows you, knows your product, or is part of your target market, just to get warmed up. But after you move from there, I would transition into pitching to somebody who's completely outside of your market, has no idea who you are, what you serve, is definitely not your customer at the slightest. And once you can confidently pitch to them, you can confidently pitch to anyone. So that's my advice for anyone here.
I love that. I especially love your last point on starting with someone who knows you as a way to build your confidence and really get that pitch down, and then honing that expertise with somebody who doesn't know you and doesn't know your product, because that really, I think, helps you get away from the jargon too, right? Get out of the world that you're currently in, where people have that common understanding of the language you're using, and really test it on an outside audience. That's great. So Sidraka, from your experience, you're a communications officer at CARE. And as an NGO, CARE is a very different kind of organization than Jasmine runs and as Linda works at. So tell me more from your perspective about pitching and communication in your work. Why does it matter? And what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And there's one point actually that I would like to highlight first. Although I work as communications officer at CARE International Madagascar, I'm also a self-entrepreneur. And I would like to talk about the importance of pitching and communications in general, not only in the context of my work with CARE. And a few days ago, I was reading a book about sales. And one sentence that really hit me at that time was that selling actually is everything in life. We are either selling or failing. And to some extent, I totally agree with that, because we might be during a job interview or in the middle of a sales pitch. We always need to communicate how good we are, or related to the the job description that they need. And also we need to communicate how worthy our product is. And the second point is the link between communication and success in general. And I would like to start with the big difference. That was a big realizations that I had. The difference between what we call performance and success. Performance basically means that we are skilled at something, but nobody knows about it. Success on the contrary is when you are skilled at something, but everyone knows about that skill of yours. And to me, it's very important to communicate that performance. We need to go from performance to success, because success is not about us only. If you are good at table tennis, for example, that remains a performance. But what we need is success. So we need to market that. We need to communicate how good we are at something. And this is why I think pitching, but also communication in general, are both so crucial. So we've talked about storytelling, as Linda Rolfe just highlighted, and I agree with that. It's a great way to connect with our audience. When it comes to pitching, the form and the content are both important. So talking about the form, for example, we must be enthusiastic. There is this 4 seconds rule where people judge us very quickly. We need to be upbeat, enthusiastic, as I can read here, full of energy as well, because those 4 seconds are really important. And we also need to work on our introduction. How can we attract the audience or the investors' attention during those 4 seconds? And talking about the form, the content, Linda wrote just highlighted the importance of storytelling. We can talk about a little anecdote that we've experienced, but basically those are the things that I would like to share with your question, Jennifer.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I loved that quote that you started out with. I think there's so much truth in that selling is everything in life. I think that in a way, everything we do, we're selling something to someone, trying to influence them. So fantastic. Thank you all for your insights on that. We have some questions coming in from the audience. So I think now is a good time to start the conversation with them. I will go to the first question that I have on my screen here, which is, how does one suppress anxiety when pitching for the first time? And Jasmine, you talked a little bit about that when you talked about moving from someone you're comfortable with to somebody who doesn't know it. Could you maybe expand on that and share some of your thoughts on suppressing anxiety?
Absolutely. And one, I want to say anxiety is completely normal to feel if you're pitching. I'm reading Outline by Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks about the 10,000 hour rule and how the more time you take, that's what's required to build expertise. And so to that point, I'm not saying you need 10,000 hours, but the more you practice, the more you'll be able to pitch comfortably. And so I still get anxiety, but still I'm more comfortable with it because now I do it a little bit more often. So I could say just push through and keep going.
That's fantastic. And Linda, you have just a wealth of experience working in a variety of different places. And I'm sure you've seen many people try to, conquer their anxiety before they go on air. What advice do you have?
So practice, like Jasmine said, is one, and really know your messages and your elevator pitch by heart. But then I find it also helps to, you got to psych yourself up before you do it, right? And everybody always think about when a marathoner runs across the finish line, everybody's always going like this, right? And so sometimes I'll just hide out in the back and do a power pose like that. I mean, it's a really natural pose that gives you power and energy and gets your endorphins going. There's a reason why everybody automatically does that at the finish line. So that could be a different way of doing it.
That's so creative. I like the idea of the power pose. And Subraka, as an entrepreneur, I know you've pitched to many. How do you conquer your anxiety? Do you use tricks like a power pose to psych yourself up beforehand? What is your secret to pitching without anxiety or with minimal anxiety?
Well, I think anxiety, we need first to understand that anxiety or stress, it's totally normal to have them, but we need to differentiate between the two types of stress. We call them like the positive stress, which is also called eustress, and the negative stress, which actually stops us from growing. But when we call about positive stress, this just means that we are within our comfort zone and that we need to get out of that comfort zone. So when it comes to pitching, I think it's just a positive stress, and just consider that as an opportunity to grow. But the most concrete thing that I'd like to suggest the person who asked that is maybe to join a public speaking club and a supportive environment as well, because as Jasmine and Linda said, it's all about practice. We don't need to complete the 10,000 hours, but as long as it's a supportive environment, we will feel much more confident and then get rid of that fear.
That is a great response. Thank you for that. So our next question from the audience is, when pitching to investors, how do you convince them that there is a return on investment, especially if it's a new business that you're not sure about yet? Perhaps, Jasmine, I'll start with you again, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, since I know you've launched a successful business. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. The first thing I would say is, again, know who your audience is. If you're pitching to angel investors or venture capitalists, they are in this business and they know the risk profile. So it's okay that this is just starting out and this is a new idea. However, there's a couple ways you can kind of validate your success. Of course, the one that you first think of is top line is sales. And so, are you starting to sell? What is your rate for selling? Is it growing? Or if you're not even there yet, we live in the social media world. Do you have followers on social media? Are people engaging with your posts? Like, what type of metrics do you have to even say that you're in the realm of success? Or even if you're, even taking a further step back, maybe you can even just market size and just kind of figure out how big this market is, because that also gets people interested. If this is a huge market that's up and coming, and you have a disruptive idea that no one knows about, that's still very valuable. So I guess all that can say, I'll package that up, is to know your competitive advantages and to lean into that. And again, there's also so many different ways to raise money. I think a lot of people first think investors, but no, there's actually steps you can take throughout the process. Like there's crowdfunding, which is really cool. You go to all your friends, your family, you can put it online, and then the people who want to invest within you, they can, whether that's small investments, micro donations, or it can be larger investments. And that's a really great way. And there's one platform called I Fund Women that I definitely recommend, but also Kickstarter and Indiegogo. There's also debt crowdfunding. There's also equity crowdfunding, and there's also angel investors and venture capitalists. And I say that in the order because that's kind of how the flow should go. You don't have to run to investment because equity is the most expensive type of investment. So happy to go more in specifics if you have any further questions, but just go ahead and find what your competitive advantages are and you'll be great.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And Sitraka, I think that is a question that you've probably thought about as well. Any insights on how you convince people, investors, that there's a return on investment when it's a new business and you're just starting out and you yourself have maybe a couple doubts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Actually, there is this notion of minimum viable product. And I think it's worth trying not only to work silently on a project, but focus on that minimum viable product first. As of my case, I worked on a website first, and then really tried to analyze who is the audience, where do they come from, and how much time they spend on the website. And only with all of those data would I convince the potential investors to invest in my business. But I would not directly go to them and just market my idea, but with solid data, whether it would be working or not. So this notion of minimum viable product, I think, is crucial in business, and especially when we are starting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I hear everybody agreeing. Linda, do you have a follow-up comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, it's so interesting because my product is information, right? We make people smarter. And so the ROI on that is obvious, right? If you read our stuff, you'll be smarter, be able to make better decisions and be a better citizen. But I wanted to bring up the concept of validators because I think they're very important as well. So who can you get to be an ambassador for your product, for your idea? Someone who's maybe already established in that arena or industry, right? I think they go a long way. I don't know if either Jasmine or Saraka had experience with that.
Jasmine or Saraka, any thoughts or comments on that?
Absolutely, Linda. Partnerships are key. That's a great way to, especially in the beginning, to even start generating those sales. You can cross-post people, or even if it's a larger partnership. For my team, we were able to do a multi-year partnership with the NBA version of ice skating, so much different type of realm, but that was a huge boost for us as a small company. And so these partnerships is another way to validate as well, to Linda's point.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Thank you. All right. We have questions coming in. Let's move to the next one. Going back to storytelling, which is a theme that's come up, and knowing your audience. What recommendations do you have for storytelling for diverse audiences and communities? And perhaps, Linda, I'll start with you on that one, since you've also done this from the CNN side of things and the Woodrow Wilson Center side of things. You have very different perspectives to offer.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting question because this takes a lot of work, right? And you have to, in journalism, it's tough because everything's such on a deadline. So it's even harder in that academic realm. It's a little slower. We can be more thoughtful. But again, it's knowing your audiences and really making an effort to include as many perspectives and people as you can, and not falling into the trap of, having a perspective from a certain group and being like, okay, we got that one perspective from that group. The whole group thinks that way, right? I mean, that's a trap I think a lot of people fall into. And you have to be wary of that. But again, it's making sure. And then another thing is different cultures and different audiences, different countries. There's so many different ways to communicate, right? And so again, what you're doing for your US audience or what you're doing for your Madagascar audience is not going to be the same, I don't think. And so I also go around the world and I teach journalism in countries all over the world. And every time I do my workshops, I have to adjust it for what matters in that country, what people are interested in that country, what people in that culture find important. And it's just so different. And again, because there's so much information and we can reach so many different audiences, you really have to drill down on what's important for each one and know who they are.
That's fantastic. And how do you find your information for that? Where do you start to look for finding out what is important to the audience that you are specifically trying to reach in a given scenario?
Yeah, that's really tough, right? So in journalism, we have when everybody goes around somewhere they've never been before, because we would often end up in a country that we hadn't had time to research. You have people on the ground that are your partners in what you're doing there, your fixers that are going to help you navigate through what's going on in that specific country. At the Wilson Center, it's research, and we're very we bring scholars from all over the world, 100 scholars a year we bring to Washington, D.C. to study, to write books. And that's what's great about working there, is that we always have an influx of new people from different places coming in, giving us perspective and teaching us about what's going on at that moment. We never get stale. So, yeah.
I like that. Jasmine, Citraka, any thoughts from either of you on the storytelling for diverse audience question?
About storytelling, I think the form that we adapt and the structure that we adapt when we tell the story is really important, because I believe the audience can be as various as possible as long as we adopt that structure. I think it would be a hit anyway. So as I can remember, there is this structure as we start with a problem, or the specific person starts with a problem, and then we go through the story and tell how they overcame that problem. And in many cultures, we love happy ending. Or we would like to share the moral of the story. What is the moral of that story? So it's a great way also to teach people lessons, or just to communicate what they can learn from that story. So this structure, I think, is really important, and especially if it's a diverse audience.
I would say, I would say conflict, crisis, resolution, right? The story arc.
Exactly.
I agree completely. I'm just going to add that you also have so many diverse ways, different vehicles to communicate, whether that's video, whether that's a performance, whether that's, poetry, whatever it is to tell a story. I think there's different ways to incorporate it across the world that might resonate with certain people. And so there's far more ways to kind of tell a story now, particularly in the social media age. And so that's very intriguing and exciting.
That's great. Thank you. And I think that I love how this is all tying together with some of the points that came out in the beginning, the storytelling, the know your audience, even, information overload. How do you reach people when there's so much information and there are many different platforms? It's something that you have to think about, how you're going to get your story to them and stand out from the others. So let's move to our next question, which is, given internet taxes and constraints related to digital accessibility in Africa, sometimes you have to pay or invest deeply in order to access online information. What role can YALI alumni members play to help this issue and close the gap on information access? Wow, that is a tough question. Citraka, I'm going to put you on the spot as a YALI alumni. What role do you think that your fellow YALI alumni members can play to help close that information access gap that you're seeing on the continent?
Well, my project, as I was selected for the Mandela Washington Fellowship, was a public speaking club. So we were focused on teaching people how to get better with public speaking and to get rid with that public speaking fear. So I think the first point is really to focus on a specific area not to general knowledge in general, but for my case, it's about English, about public speaking. And with that offer, we try to look for people who might be interested in that offer. And I think creating that platform would reduce that knowledge gap here in Africa. So depending on the offer that we have, we can solve a specific problem, but not necessarily all of the knowledge gap that exists out there. But that's just my personal experience, I think.
So it's a piecemeal thing. I think everybody can influence. I think what you're saying is that everyone can influence the information gap within their own sphere and within their own set of activities. And as alumni, and especially as, YALI alumni, you really are, I think we see from our alumni that they have increasing attention paid to them. Their voice is being heard by different communities that maybe they didn't have access before, and they can use that platform to reach out to others to get their information out there. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Linda, I think I see you.
I always have a comment. I would say that the call to action we've talked about, that Jasmine talked a lot about, is crucial here too, right? Tell 5 friends. Let's get this grassroots going. To have your 5 friends tell 5 friends, right? I mean, that's how we have to get the information out there, to get people interested in new things, and to help close that gap.
That's great. I like that too. And it really capitalizes on networks as well, which is a big part of the Mandela Washington Fellowship and our RLC regional leadership centers experience. And of course, the YALI network itself is all focused on networking and really building that community and bringing people together so that you can share information and learn from each other. Wonderful. All right, let's look at the next one. And our next question actually goes right back to the question on anxiety, which I think in public speaking, and my husband actually teaches public speaking at the University of Maryland. So I hear his stories all the time about anxiety and people being nervous about speaking. But what advice do you have for anxiety and freezing when you're talking to new people? Because for some of us, myself included, it's nerve-wracking and your mind goes blank. How do you avoid that? What do you do when that happens? Jasmine, perhaps I'll start with you as our pitching expert.
Absolutely. And I haven't done my 10,000 hours yet, so I'm not an expert, definitely on my way. But to that point, that's absolutely, again, very normal. Outside of an entrepreneur, I'm a performer. I'm a lifetime performer. I started at the age of 5. And one thing that you quickly learn is you have a routine and you kind of move through it. And sometimes it's muscle memory. But those will be moments where, like, I'm frozen. I forgot what I'm doing next. And so I say in those moments, just to breathe, because I think anxiety comes up, your shoulders, your body gets tight. Take a deep breath and to kind of send yourself back into that moment and pick up as quickly as you left off. And when it comes to pitching, you should kind of ways to kind of get back into your flow. Like maybe like you just said this word, this word leads into this next section of your pitch. Just really again, learn your pitch, going through it over and over. You might sound crazy talking to yourself, but keep practicing it. Keep getting into that flow and have these different signals. And so that I just said this, now I have to transition to the next part of my pitch. And so that those moments might happen when you blank, you might be able to kind of like transition smoothly into moving forward within your pitch. So it's not over. I think the biggest thing that you want to avoid is just saying, I forgot, I'm done, I'm walking away. Like, pick back up. Everyone understands that's very, very human. Just go with your flow and continue on going.
Yeah.
I like that idea. Linda, what were you going to add there?
Right. There are people who are like, I'm going to freeze on TV. I'm not going to, remember what I'm supposed to say. And yeah, I agree. It's just stop talking, take a breath, and then just pick back up again. And people don't really notice it. And again, it's natural and human, I think. And then also, I agree, sometimes just own it. I lost my train of thought, just acknowledge that you did maybe, and then again, just pick up and keep going. So.
And I think in general, people want you to be successful. And so when you acknowledge something like that, you're building support for yourself as well. They're not looking for you to fail. They want you to do well. Even if, they know they can't invest in your product. They still want you to be successful. And Raka, any thoughts from your experiences?
Well, against anxiety, once again, maybe in addition to what's been said, everything that's been said there, there's also preparation, I think, which we should not really neglect. Why not preparing in front of a mirror or recording ourselves with an audio, or definitely in front of a camera, why not? But that is just what I wanted to highlight. Preparation can really help us avoid those things. And even if we are doing that, it's also about moving on, just living the present moment, I would say, but not getting stressed. We all make. So it's better to keep in mind that, as you said, everyone wants us to be successful anyway.
Yeah, picking up on that, your point, Jennifer, that everyone wants you to be successful. Also, people are uncomfortable with silence. And so if you stop talking, they will jump in. And so I think often someone will jump in to like prod you along, or, say, oh, I'm interested, keep going, or tell me more, or something like that. They're not going to let you hang out there in the silence because they don't like it either. That's actually a technique we used to use to, interview people to get them, to maybe make some news. Just won't say anything. And then the subject will fill the silence.
I was just going to add, all to this point, agree completely. And there's a really great book called The Charisma Myth, and it talks about charisma and breaks it down a little bit further. But one principle that they suggest is the halo effect. And so to your point, Jennifer and Linda, and Chaka, it's like, picture that person is someone who's just abundantly nice to you, or somebody that you already know, or maybe your mom is in the audience, whatever it is, to kind of just calm you down. I think when you feel like they're your competitor or against you, that furthers anxiety. So I also highly recommend that book. It's called The Charisma Myth as well.
Could you say the name of the book one more time?
Charisma Myth, The Charisma Myth. And I can send it in the chat.
Yes, please. I'm sure that there's people out there who would love to take a look at that.
And one last thing that I would like to add, when we are stressed, we are sometimes overthinking. And I think it really helped me, especially before a speech, to visualize and really to think nothing but positive things, that everything will go smoothly. And even with that, we still need preparation, like preparation and positive visualization. I think that can really help us.
Yeah, that made me think of one more thing. You also should remember, like, you're the expert on what you're talking about. And so no matter what, you know more than the other person. So I tell people when they get interviewed on television, you're getting interviewed on television because you're the expert. So you know more than anybody else. So be confident in your knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that's sometimes hard to remember, especially when people are asking you difficult questions. They're asking you those questions because they don't know, and they want your input and they want your perspective.
Yeah.
Great. Another question has come up on storytelling, which is emerging as a theme and one of my favorite themes. And I think it goes back to a little bit of what Jasmine was talking about creating a routine and using techniques to move yourself through the presentation. But thinking about techniques, what techniques do you use to ensure that the audience retains your key points and that they remember what you've said after you're, no longer in their line of sight? I'll open it up to anyone who wants to speak, but Linda, perhaps you have some thoughts?
Sure. So I do a lot of media training for people going on TV, right? And I tell them, set out your 3 top key messages that you want to get across. And then this is going to sound a little complicated, but for each key message, you have 3 supports for that message that support your key message. And so you have 3 different ways to say each thing. So you're saying the same message, but in 3 different ways each time. And it's repetition, right? You want to drill down whatever your key points are. And it takes people, several times hearing the same thing to actually, ingest it. And so, using analogies or comparisons is also a good way to support a message. Telling a story about that message, or as we call them on television, a great soundbite, right? What is your tagline? What is your one memorable short soundbite that you're going to say that people remember, that supports your message? So people go on interviews or go on pitches, if they're doing it off the cuff, and that's the key, to make it look like you're doing it off the cuff when really you've written out your messages, you have all your supports for them, you have how you're going to say those messages in different ways so that people really get it. I hope that was clear. Yeah.
That was great. Jasmine, any thoughts from you on the how you make your message stick?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything that Linda said from her experience with the coaching piece. And to that point, I think you should always summarize what you're saying. I think even the very best listeners cannot listen too long, over 15 minutes. Make sure you put that into your pitch. Pause on purpose, take that moment to catch in and kind of see. Make sure you also distractions. We're in a very high-paced, fast-paced world. It's very easy to get distracted from a click or a noise or this, so try to eliminate it as much as possible. And also, I'm a graduating MBA student, and one of my professors told me this message I will always remember, and she taught me to, when I was about to give a pitch, I was running for something in the student government, and she said, before you speak, pause to make sure there's no interruptions. And so you can just wait there in the front of the room nicely, just waiting there until everything is quieted and then speak. And that was a lesson because it's very easy when people are distracted to kind of stay distracted even though you're talking. But starting the room off when you're talking to make sure that everyone's already quiet and listening, that's also something you can do. And if you notice that the train of thought is already lost, like I said, even the very best speakers only have so much attention span. You can always use that pausing trick as well. Not only as a speaker are you using voices and sounds, you're also using the stillness as well. So that's another advice I would add.
And I think that could be a technique too for making sure you head off nervousness and anxiety that comes from starting your pitch when no one's listening or when the room isn't quite ready for you yet. And just making sure you get off on the right foot, not only so they can hear, but also so that you're confident in your ability to speak and your ability to get the message across. Linda.
I would say leave behinds. Who wants to talk about leave behinds? Are also really important, right? You want to leave them with something physical, and also the call to action, right? So thinking about your collateral, what you're going to bring that expands on your pitch. If they want more information, they're going to have it.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found to be most effective in that for leave behinds?
I mean, we leave our research behind, but I'd be interested to see what the two entrepreneurs think is an effective leave behind item.
Sure.
Is it product?
Yeah. Is it product? Is it a fact sheet? What, as an entrepreneur, when you're selling something, what is effective to, as a leave behind?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm looking at you and I'm realizing you can't see that I'm looking at you because we're on a screen.
Yes, the difference is
I was looking at you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Jasmine was ready to answer, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I would think so on the entrepreneur side, pitch deck is what leads a lot of our conversation. So always be able to send the pitch deck. Another advice that I've learned from that is that your pitch deck is also printable. So maybe you have a version that maybe has less ink that's required or less pictures that they're able to print out depending on who your audience is, but also product as well, and sometimes too, so this is a slightly different thing, but like sometimes when I'm talking to investors, we might actually, or advisors, we've sent cards to them, thank you cards with our picture in it as well. And so there's different ways depending on different mediums, depending on who you're talking to. But I'm very interested to see what Sitraka believes as well in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, Sitraka, what do you think?
Talking about the first question, actually, I would like to go back with that first. How to make sure that our ideas stick with the audience. And from the audience's point of view, I think people tend to remember the most our introduction and our conclusion, and to give the best impression. And talking about preparedness as well, I think it's really worth it to work and to repeat that introduction and also the conclusion, and even to work on your conclusion first. What is the message that you would really like to get across? And then all of the development that you've been doing, it should end with that conclusion. So I think it's one of the surest way to be sure that people would retain our message or our story. And talking about story also, I think it's better that it should be relatable. People should relate to what we are talking about, and relatable, and work on the introduction and the conclusion. I think that's what I can say with that.
That's great. And I'd actually really love to build off of that and ask Sidraka first you, but then also I'd love to open it up to Jasmine and Linda. How do you identify, you know so much about your product, you know so much about your business. How do you identify what those key messages are of everything you can say? How are you choosing what that most important thing is for that audience?
To me personally, I would not really offer a product first, but I would like to get to know my audience first, and then try to solve their problems, and then fit my message to their needs. So that would be really my first step to recreate the business. Try to build an audience first, and then as time goes by, adapt and how to say that, really adapt my message to their needs, ask them frequently questions, and I think it can be something that helps. Yeah.
So get to know your audience, and I think what you're saying is that to get to know your audience, you need to ask them questions too.
Yes.
And I think someone else said it earlier, you can't just assume that what you've heard from one person is relevant to everyone or is relevant to every audience. You really need to listen and open up your thoughts and your minds to hearing what people are telling you. Linda, did you have any thoughts or comments on that question?
Sure. When I work with people on creating their messages, it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of prep, but it's really the only way I think you're going to succeed. And I tell them, to sit down and create a huge book of messages that you can pick for each audience. Which ones do you think will be most effective with each one? People are often like, I don't have, busy professionals or people running companies. Like, I don't have time to sit down and do this. But it's really a great exercise that can also improve your bottom line, improve your business, improve your sales by really focusing on what your messages are, and then testing them with different audiences too. So maybe you've come up with this key message and it just bombs every time. Like, you're just going to take that out of your repertoire, right? But it's really the prep work. It's really the prep work, and then listening and changing and adjusting to the different audiences and opportunities.
That's great. And Jasmine, any follow-up thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share?
Well, it's very important for stakeholder management to take into account who they are, what their interests are, and where are they leading. Are they someone who's already, of your product? They're already interested in what you're serving or what you offer. I know we're all from different industries, but just depending on which industry you're in. But then you also have people maybe in the middle, they're more neutral. They could be swayed either way. And then you have people who might be opposite of that. So you have to be able to pitch to understand what their interests are and how you can meet that. And so Linda's point of further knowing your audience and being able to have that pitch for them, but also key to in the moment of just taking it in. Are they receptive to this? Are they, did that not for them? Okay, maybe that if that hasn't worked here, then maybe I'll try this out. So being very flexible, iterative process, that's very much part of the startup, is being able to take into account and live feedback from your stakeholders. And so I would also encourage that as well.
Do you ever take it personally?
That's a great question. I think as humans it's natural too, but I think one of the biggest things is taking a step back, and what you have to do is separate. A lot of it might be great feedback, great criticism, but also got to understand the perspective. And so for me, I'm in a performance sport, and so if I'm talking to someone who's not a performer, who's never worn tights, had never had a need for them, I also have to have that context in mind when they give me their criticism. So it's a little bit of both, I would say, taking it in, that good feedback, but also understanding what their perspective is.
Do you do clothing for men and women? I was just curious. Yes.
Yeah, great question. It is gender neutral, but largely more for women for our products.
Okay.
Great, thank you all for that. So we are getting close to the end. So perhaps to close out the session, could I ask each of you to share one big takeaway that you'd like the participants to leave with today? Linda, why don't I start with you? I'll go in the order from the beginning.
So I think my big takeaway for everybody listening today is that you can do it. You can break through. I know it seems like in the beginning, it's like this gargantuan mountain that you have to climb. But with preparation, research, and everything we've talked about today, working through all the key communication and pitching steps, you can do it. And I think being flexible and adjusting along the way, everything that we've said. And I just want people not to be discouraged. And we also learn from our failures. And so I'm just want to leave with that encouragement to everybody out there.
That's a great note to end on. And Jasmine, what would you leave our participants today with?
I think that's great advice. And just to that point, you're going to fall at some points, but that is okay. I think you just have to adjust your idea of failure. You know, typically might just be a lesson, and take that in and move forward. And so I can give a little tidbit from me. My team and I, we were semifinalists in the Chicago Bulls pitch competition. It was the first time they ever held. And we were so prepared. We were so ready. We're going to stay there. So we all stood on top of the stage and was pitching to the judges who were in front of us, but lower than us. And at the end of the pitch, we started talking to the judges, and they said, we couldn't see your slides at all. We had no idea what you all were saying. And it was like, oh my gosh, we're so prepared what we were saying verbally. We didn't even consider what their view was. And so those are just little things that happen all the time. Just take that in. Now we're going to make sure that where we stand and make sure everyone has a clear view of what we're presenting. So things like that happen, but take it in and keep on rolling is what I would.
Yeah.
It's not a failure if you learn from it. And Sudraka, to close us out, what would you like to leave the audience with today?
Well, we talked about pitching communication skills, but a lot of people also asked about how to overcome anxiety and stress. So I would like to end up with that, the importance of public speaking, and to join a public speaking club. Because really talking in front of people, usually it's said that it's the second thing that people are scared the most after death. Yes. So it's all about practice and to get surrounded with positive people that would support you. And really, I would like to end up with this quote from Jim Rohn, who is an American motivational speaker. Yeah, he said, we don't have to be great to start, but we have to start to be great. So really, I would like to end up with that. And thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. And I think that to your message, reiterates a key theme that I've heard in addition to storytelling and know your audience. I think the key theme is practice. This pitching, the communication isn't something that comes naturally to everyone, but if it doesn't come naturally to you, that doesn't mean you can't be great at it. The key to being great is to prepare, to practice, to do those things like ask questions to your audience, to create a list of messages, to practice in front of the mirror and record yourself. And to have a routine, to know what words triggers the next idea so that you get better and better each time you pitch. So with that, we are just about out of time. So I would like to thank our panelists. I would like to thank our audience. Thank you all for being here and for joining this conversation. I hope you got some practical tips. I know I did, and will be quickly writing down some great ideas that I've had during this conversation. So I hope you all found it fruitful as well, and that you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you all so much, and take care and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.